By October 1942, Stalingrad was no longer a city in any meaningful sense. It was a field of ruins where maps were useless and front lines shifted by the hour. Buildings collapsed faster than they could be named. Streets existed only as memory. In this landscape, the German Sixth Army discovered that numbers, armor, and air power meant almost nothing once the fight compressed into basements, stairwells, and shattered walls. Casualty reports began showing a pattern that made no sense. Officers were dying at a steady, unnatural rate. Artillery observers disappeared after standing up for seconds. Machine gun crews were eliminated between reloads. Each death looked isolated, but together they formed something far more disturbing. The killings were happening across different sectors, often at the same time, with no clear firing point to investigate. Germans assumed they were facing an elite sniper, possibly the best the Red Army had. Counter-sniper teams were deployed. Observation posts were reinforced. Orders were issued for officers to limit movement during daylight. None of it worked. Every response produced more casualties, not fewer. Units sent to hunt the sniper simply vanished into the rubble. German command could not see was that the threat was not a man, but a system. The battlefield itself had been turned into a hunting ground, and the hunter did not think like a soldier trained on parade fields and doctrine manuals. He thought like someone raised, where missing once meant starving, and being seen once meant dying. And Stalingrad, with its broken geometry and endless concealment, was the perfect place for that kind of thinking to become lethal. The man behind the pattern did not come from a military academy or an officer's school. He came from a place where survival depended on patience, silence, and the ability to read behavior long before pulling a trigger. Vasily Zaitsev was born in the Ural Mountains, in a village so remote that hunting was not a skill, but a necessity. From childhood, he learned that animals were never defeated by force alone. They were defeated by understanding. You watched first, you waited. You learned their habits. Only then did you act. Urals, Zaitsev learned something more important than marksmanship. He learned that a lone hunter is vulnerable. Wolves attack isolated prey, but they fear coordinated groups. Packs survive because they watch for each other. When Zaitsev arrived in Stalingrad and saw the ruins for the first time, he did not see chaos. He saw terrain that behaved like the forests and mountains of his childhood, only made of concrete instead of trees. The army initially treated snipers as individual specialists, scattered across the front. Zaitsev understood immediately that this was a mistake. A single sniper could kill, but he could also be hunted. German doctrine was built around eliminating isolated threats. Zaitsev decided to remove isolation entirely. He reorganized snipers into small, tightly coordinated groups that functioned as one organism rather than separate men. The structure was simple but revolutionary. 6 rifles, divided into 3 pairs. Each pair consisted of a shooter and a spotter. The pairs were positioned so that every blind spot was covered by another team. No position existed alone. If a German sniper revealed himself while hunting one pair, he was immediately exposed to the other 2. Movement through the kill zone became fatal from multiple directions at once. Communication was silent. No radios, no shouted warnings. Simple signals passed through pre-arranged methods that left no electronic trace. The teams fired only a few shots before relocating, often to positions that made no tactical sense on a map. German counter-snipers searched windows and rooftops, exactly where Doctrine told them to look. Zaitsev's teams hid in shadows, depressions, rubble piles, and angles that violated every textbook rule. Germans experienced felt impossible. They believed they were facing a single, exceptionally mobile sniper. In reality, they were walking into overlapping fields of fire designed to punish anyone who tried to hunt the hunter. Every attempt to respond triggered another loss. Every adjustment made the situation worse. The rifle system did more than kill soldiers. It froze units in place. Officers stopped moving. Orders were delayed. Initiative vanished. Fear spread faster than casualties. And in a city where hesitation was death, paralysis was catastrophic. By the time German command realized they were not fighting a man but a method, the damage had already become irreversible. As the killings continued, the Germans began to understand that something was fundamentally wrong with their assumptions. This was not a contest of marksmanship. It was not even a sniper duel in the traditional sense. It was a psychological war being fought inside the minds of officers and infantry alike. Every movement became a calculation. Every pause felt dangerous. The silence itself turned hostile. Officers stopped leading from the front. They gave orders from cover, through runners who often never returned. Artillery observers refused to stand fully upright. Machine gun crews hesitated before repositioning, knowing that the few seconds of exposure could be fatal. Entire platoons waited for darkness before attempting movements that should have taken minutes. Stalingrad's ruins did not just conceal Soviet snipers, they amplified fear. Zaitsev exploited this hesitation deliberately. His teams did not hunt random targets. They selected men whose deaths would cause maximum disruption. Officers, signalmen, machine gun leaders, artillery spotters. Each kill removed not just a soldier, but a function. Units remained technically intact on paper while becoming tactically useless in reality. The front line did not collapse forward or backward. It simply stopped working. Counter-sniper teams were deployed in increasing numbers. These were not amateurs. Many had experience from France, the Balkans, and earlier phases of the Eastern Front. They followed Doctrine precisely. Elevated positions, clear fields of fire, strong cover. Zaitsev studied them the way he once studied animals, not by watching where they aimed, but by watching how they behaved when they thought they were safe. Emerged, repositioning at the same times each day, favoring right-handed firing angles, trusting optics more than instinct, looking outward, never downward or behind. Zaitsev's teams waited for moments of routine, not moments of action. When the pattern repeated, they fired once, sometimes twice, and disappeared before return fire could even be aimed. Failed German response reinforced the illusion that they were chasing a ghost. Artillery strikes were called onto suspected sniper zones, only for Soviet fire to resume minutes later from somewhere else entirely. Patrols sent to confirm kills became targets themselves. The more aggressively the Germans hunted, the more predictable they became. Mid-November, the effect was undeniable. German combat reports described units that were technically well supplied, but psychologically exhausted. Men refused to move during daylight. Orders were questioned. Confidence eroded. Zaitsev's system had achieved something rare in warfare. It had severed the connection between numbers and control. Stalingrad was no longer decided by divisions or battalions. It was being shaped by small, invisible teams that dictated when and where the enemy was allowed to exist. And the most dangerous weapon in the city was no longer artillery or tanks. It was the understanding that standing up, even for a moment, could mean you would never sit down again. By December, German command stopped treating the situation as a nuisance and began treating it as a crisis. Orders reached Stalingrad that no other sniper threat had ever generated. The priority was no longer territory, factories, or forward movement. The priority was the elimination of the sniper network itself. Not suppression, not containment, destruction. 8 counter-sniper teams were assembled from multiple divisions and sent into the ruins with a single mission: hunt the hunters. These men were experienced, disciplined, and confident. Many had grown up hunting themselves. They believed that skill would solve the problem. What they did not understand was that skill meant nothing without the right frame of thinking. Germans moved in small groups, establishing textbook positions with clear sight lines and overlapping fire. They believed control came from height and visibility. Zaitsev believed control came from invisibility. His teams observed the Germans infiltrate before the Germans realized they were being watched. They allowed the enemy to settle, to grow comfortable, to believe the terrain was secure. The signal came, the response was instantaneous. Multiple shots, fired within seconds, from angles that made no sense. Targets dropped before they could react. Return fire struck empty rubble. Positions that had just fired were already abandoned. The Germans were not fighting a force that reacted to contact. They were fighting a force that had already moved on. Attempts to adapt failed. The Germans tried spreading out. They tried tightening formations. They tried waiting longer before moving. Each adjustment made them slower, more cautious, and easier to predict. Fear replaced initiative. Every decision became defensive. In an environment where speed and decisiveness were survival, hesitation was fatal. German command turned to brute force. If the snipers could not be hunted, the terrain itself would be destroyed. Artillery and mortars erased entire sections of the city, collapsing buildings, pulverizing cover, turning potential hiding places into dust. It was not a precision response, it was an admission of defeat. In one of these barrages, Zaitsev was caught by explosive fire. Shrapnel tore through his face, his eyes were destroyed. When medics reached him, they believed he was already dead. The man who had reshaped the Battle of Stalingrad lay motionless in the rubble he had mastered. Germans, it appeared to be a victory. The ghost was gone. The silence would end. But they misunderstood the nature of what they had been fighting. The danger had never been confined to one man. The system was already in motion, already taught, already spreading. And as Zaitsev was carried from the battlefield, his method remained behind. The six-rifle system continued to operate. His students continued the work. The fear did not lift. The paralysis did not end. And the city did not give the Germans what they needed most. Control. The hunter. But the hunt itself went on. Zaitsev did not return to the ruins of Stalingrad as a shooter, but the battle no longer required him to. His greatest impact had already occurred. What he left behind was not a legend, but a method that could be replicated, taught, and scaled. While the Germans believed they had removed the source of the problem, the Red Army understood something far more important. Knowledge multiplies faster than firepower. Zaitsev was reassigned as an instructor. From behind the lines, he trained new snipers using principles that had nothing to do with medals or heroism. He taught patience before precision, observation before action, behavior over bravado. His students learned that the battlefield spoke constantly, if you knew how to listen. Footsteps, routines, habits, fear. Every human left patterns. The sniper's job was not to shoot skillfully, but to recognize the moment when the enemy made himself vulnerable. The six-rifle system became Doctrine. Small, coordinated teams replaced lone hunters. Overlapping fields of fire, constant relocation, decoys, and silence became standard practice. What began as a response to Stalingrad spread across the Eastern Front. German units encountered the same paralysis elsewhere, even when Zaitsev himself was nowhere near the fighting. At the end of the war, the numbers told the story clearly. Zaitsev's personal kill count was significant, but it was not what made him dangerous. His students, trained in his method, accounted for thousands of enemy casualties. Entire German formations learned to fear movement more than engagement. A battlefield where the enemy refuses to move is already lost. After the war, the myth grew. Propaganda added duels and dramatized encounters that blurred truth and fiction. But the reality was simpler and more unsettling. Zaitsev did not win Stalingrad by being the best shot. He won by changing how the fight was understood. He turned urban combat into a hunting ground and transformed sniping from an individual skill into a coordinated system. Modern militaries still use variations of his ideas today. Paired shooters, overwatch, interlocking zones of control. The principles endure because human behavior has not changed. People still follow routines. Fear still creates hesitation. And hesitation under the wrong conditions, is fatal. Stalingrad, the Germans searched for one man and never found him. What they never fully understood was that they were never fighting one sniper at all. They were fighting a way of thinking. And once that way of thinking took hold, it could not be killed with shells, numbers, or orders. It did not fall to force, it fell to patience. The story of the six-rifle tactic at Stalingrad is not, at its core, a story about sniping, marksmanship, or even individual heroism. It is a lesson about how humans adapt under pressure, how systems outperform individuals, and how wars are often decided not by who has more strength, but by who understands reality more clearly. Stalingrad stripped warfare down to its rawest elements. Technology, doctrine, and numbers collided with fear, habit, and human limitation. What emerged from that collision was a truth that applies far beyond one city or one war. The first lesson is that environments dictate outcomes more than intentions. The German army arrived at Stalingrad with a doctrine that had worked spectacularly across Europe. Blitzkrieg assumed space, speed, and visibility. It assumed that front lines could be mapped, flanks identified, and breakthroughs exploited. Stalingrad destroyed those assumptions. When combat compressed into rooms and stairwells, doctrine became a liability. The Red Army, forced to fight in ruins, adapted because it had no alternative. Adaptation was not innovation for its own sake. It was survival responding to environment. This is a recurring pattern in history. Those who succeed are rarely the ones with the best plans. They are the ones who notice fastest when the plan no longer fits reality. The second lesson is that human behavior is more predictable than technology. German counter-snipers trusted optics, elevation, and textbook positioning. Those tools were not flawed in isolation, but they were built around assumptions about how enemies behave. Zaitsev's method ignored doctrine and focused on patterns. People move at certain times. They pause in familiar ways. They relax when nothing happens for long enough. Fear does not eliminate habit, it reshapes it. By studying behavior rather than equipment, the six-rifle teams exploited something deeper than tactical mistakes. They exploited human nature. This lesson extends beyond combat. Organizations fail when they obsess over tools instead of behavior. New systems, new technologies, and new strategies promise solutions, but they often assume people will behave rationally and consistently. In reality, stress narrows perception, fear creates hesitation, and routine becomes a crutch. Zaitsev's approach worked because it acknowledged this reality instead of denying it. The third lesson is that isolation creates vulnerability. A lone sniper, no matter how skilled, is ultimately prey. The German response relied on isolating threats and eliminating them individually. The six-rifle system removed isolation entirely. Each pair existed not as an independent unit, but as part of a whole. Blind spots were not weaknesses. They were deliberately covered by others. Responsibility was shared. Risk was distributed. This transformed survivability and lethality at the same time. In broader terms, this reflects why resilient systems avoid single points of failure. Whether in military units, businesses, or societies, structures that depend on isolated brilliance collapse under pressure. Systems that distribute awareness and responsibility endure. The six-rifle tactic did not require extraordinary individuals. It required coordination, trust, and discipline. Once those elements were in place, effectiveness multiplied. The fourth lesson is that fear is more powerful than casualties. German losses from snipers were numerically small compared to artillery or infantry assaults. Yet their psychological impact was disproportionate. Fear changed behavior. Officers stopped moving. Orders slowed. Units hesitated. Initiative vanished. In war, initiative is life. When fear disrupts decision-making, the enemy does not need to destroy your forces. You destroy your own effectiveness. The principle appears repeatedly in conflicts. Armies collapse not when losses reach a specific number, but when confidence breaks. Zaitsev's method targeted confidence deliberately. Killing leaders and specialists did not just remove capability. It broadcast a message that nowhere was safe. The silence between shots became a weapon. In many ways, the absence of action was more terrifying than constant fire. Humans can adapt to noise. They struggle to adapt to uncertainty. The fifth lesson is that patience outperforms aggression in complex environments. Modern military culture often celebrates speed, boldness, and decisiveness. These traits matter, but only when the environment rewards them. Stalingrad punished impatience. Moving quickly exposed silhouettes. Aggressive probing revealed patterns. The 6 rifle teams waited. They observed. They allowed the enemy to act first, knowing that action would reveal vulnerability. The lesson has uncomfortable implications. It suggests that restraint, often mistaken for weakness, can be strength when paired with understanding. Many failures occur because leaders feel compelled to act simply to appear decisive. Zaitsev's system shows that waiting, when done intentionally, is not passivity. It is preparation. The sixth lesson is that doctrine becomes dangerous when it is followed without thought. German counter-snipers were highly trained and competent. Their failure was not incompetence, but rigidity. They applied solutions that had worked elsewhere without questioning whether the context had changed. Zaitsev, by contrast, treated doctrine as irrelevant. He relied on principles learned long before the war, rooted in observation and survival rather than theory. It repeatedly shows that institutions struggle to abandon successful ideas even when those ideas no longer apply. Success breeds confidence, and confidence hardens into certainty. Certainty resists adaptation. The German army at Stalingrad was not defeated by ignorance, but by belief in its own understanding. This is one of the most dangerous positions any organization can occupy. The seventh lesson is that knowledge scales faster than force. Zaitsev's personal kill count mattered, but it was not decisive. What mattered was transmission. By teaching others, he multiplied his impact beyond anything he could achieve alone. The 6-rifle system outlived his presence on the battlefield. Even after he was wounded, the effect continued. This is the hallmark of effective leadership. Leaders who must be present for success create fragile systems. Leaders who build methods create resilience. In civilian terms, this distinction explains why some movements fade when founders disappear, while others persist for generations. Systems that rely on personality collapse. Systems that rely on principles endure. The eighth lesson is that myths obscure real lessons. Post-war propaganda turned Zaitsev into a symbol, inventing duels and dramatizing events. These stories captured attention, but distracted from the true innovation. The danger of myth is that it personalizes success. It encourages the belief that extraordinary outcomes require extraordinary individuals. In reality, the most impactful changes often come from ordinary people applying insight systematically. Myths are comforting because they simplify. They allow societies to celebrate heroes without questioning structures. But they also prevent learning. The real lesson of Stalingrad's snipers is not that one man was exceptional. It is that understanding environment, behavior, and coordination can outperform brute strength. The ninth lesson is that warfare is ultimately human, regardless of technology. Tanks, artillery, and aircraft dominated the narrative of World War II, yet Stalingrad was decided by men moving through rubble, afraid, hungry, exhausted. The 6-rifle tactic succeeded because it addressed human limitations directly. Fatigue, fear, habit, overconfidence. Technology failed when it ignored these factors. Simple rifles succeeded when paired with insight into how people think under stress. It remains relevant in modern conflicts. Advanced systems promise dominance, but adversaries adapt by targeting human weaknesses. Technology changes faster than psychology. Those who understand this gain enduring advantages. The 10th lesson is humility. Zaitsev himself resisted glorification. He understood that he was shaped by circumstances as much as he shaped them. His method came from lessons learned long before the war, refined by necessity, not ambition. This humility allowed learning. Arrogance would have prevented it. The German failure at Stalingrad was not lack of courage or intelligence, it was lack of humility in the face of a radically changed environment. Humility allows reassessment. It allows admitting that what once worked no longer does. In any field, this may be the most difficult lesson of all. Together, these lessons reveal why Stalingrad was more than a battle. It was a demonstration of how systems emerge under extreme pressure and how human behavior shapes outcomes more decisively than plans. The six-rifle tactic was not a miracle. It was a logical response by someone who understood that survival depends on seeing reality as it is, not as Doctrine says it should be. The Germans searched for a sniper and failed because they framed the problem incorrectly. They looked for a man when they were facing a method. They sought to eliminate a threat rather than understand it. By the time they recognized the difference, the battle was already lost in ways that maps and casualty figures could not show. The enduring lesson of this story is not about killing. It is about thinking, about observation over assumption, coordination over isolation, patience over impulse, systems over individuals. These principles apply wherever humans operate under pressure, whether in war, leadership, or life itself. Stalingrad did not fall because one side wanted it more. It fell because one side learned faster. The story of the six-rifle tactic at Stalingrad is ultimately a lesson about how human beings confront chaos, adapt under pressure, and either survive or collapse, depending on how well they understand reality. It is tempting to frame this story as a tale of marksmanship or battlefield genius, but doing so misses the deeper meaning. What happened in Stalingrad was not the triumph of a gifted shooter over inferior enemies. It was the triumph of perception over assumption, of systems over individuals, and of patience over brute force. Stalingrad stripped war of its abstractions. Before the battle, the German army fought wars that could be drawn on maps. Front lines moved, arrows advanced, and doctrine functioned as intended. Stalingrad erased that structure. The city collapsed into rubble, and with it collapsed the assumptions that had guided German success across Europe. The environment itself became the dominant factor. In that environment, the side that adapted fastest gained control, regardless of numbers or equipment. This is the first and perhaps most important lesson. Environments shape outcomes more than intentions. Planning matters, but reality always matters more. The German army did not lack courage, discipline, or intelligence. What it lacked was flexibility once its existing framework stopped working. Blitzkrieg depended on space and speed. Stalingrad offered neither. Instead of open ground, there were shattered walls. Instead of maneuver, there was attrition measured in meters and minutes. German doctrine, which had been a strength, became a constraint. It told soldiers where to look, how to move, and what threats should look like. The six-rifle system succeeded because it ignored doctrine entirely and focused on what was actually happening. Leads to a second lesson. Human behavior is more predictable than technology. German counter-snipers relied on optics, elevation, and established firing positions. Those tools were effective in many contexts, but they were built around assumptions about how enemies behave. Zaitsev's approach rejected those assumptions. Instead of asking where a sniper should be, he asked where a human would behave in a certain way. Where would someone pause? When would they relax? When would they feel safe enough to expose themselves? These questions mattered more than the quality of rifles or scopes. Beings are creatures of habit, even under extreme stress. Fear does not eliminate routine, it reshapes it. German soldiers adapted by limiting movement during daylight, by favoring certain routes, by scanning familiar angles. These adaptations made them predictable. The six-rifle system exploited predictability rather than firepower. This principle extends far beyond warfare. In any complex system, failure often occurs not because tools are inadequate, but because people behave in consistent ways under pressure. Those who recognize and exploit these patterns gain leverage. The third lesson is that isolation creates vulnerability. A lone sniper, no matter how skilled, is ultimately hunted. German counter-sniper doctrine was built around identifying isolated threats and eliminating them one by one. Zaitsev understood that isolation itself was the weakness. By organizing snipers into coordinated groups with overlapping fields of observation and fire, he removed the very condition the enemy relied upon. Each pair existed not as an independent unit, but as part of a larger organism. Blind spots were not flaws. They were deliberately covered by others. The principle appears repeatedly in resilient systems. Whether in military units, organizations, or societies, structures that rely on isolated brilliance collapse when pressure increases. Systems that distribute awareness and responsibility endure. The six-rifle tactic did not require extraordinary individuals. It required coordination, discipline, and trust. Once those elements were established, lethality and survivability increased simultaneously. The system protected its members while amplifying their effect. The fourth lesson is that fear can be more decisive than casualties. German losses to snipers were small compared to artillery bombardments or infantry assaults, yet their psychological impact was devastating. Fear altered behavior. Officers stopped moving. Orders slowed. Initiative vanished. In war, initiative is life. When fear interrupts decision-making, an army does not need to be destroyed physically. It destroys itself functionally. The dynamic is visible throughout history. Armies collapse not when losses reach a specific number, but when confidence breaks. The six-rifle system targeted confidence deliberately. Killing officers, observers, and specialists removed not just individuals, but the sense of control. The silence between shots became a weapon. Humans can adapt to noise and chaos. They struggle to adapt to uncertainty. Not knowing when or where death might come is far more corrosive than constant danger. The fifth lesson is that patience outperforms aggression in complex environments. Modern military culture often celebrates speed, boldness, and decisive action. These traits matter, but only when the environment rewards them. Stalingrad punished impatience. Rapid movement exposed silhouettes. Aggressive probing revealed patterns. Zaitsev's teams waited. They observed. They allowed the enemy to act first, knowing that action would create vulnerability. The lesson is uncomfortable because it contradicts instinct. Many failures occur because leaders feel compelled to act simply to appear decisive. Waiting is often mistaken for weakness. In reality, waiting can be a form of control when paired with understanding. Zaitsev's method shows that restraint, when intentional, is not passivity, it is preparation. The next lesson is that doctrine becomes dangerous when followed without thought. German counter-snipers were highly trained professionals. Their failure was not incompetence, but rigidity. They applied solutions that had worked elsewhere without questioning whether the context had changed. Zaitsev, by contrast, treated doctrine as irrelevant. His thinking came from hunting, not manuals. He understood that survival depends on reading reality, not obeying theory. Institutions struggle to abandon successful ideas, even when those ideas no longer apply. Success breeds confidence, and confidence hardens into certainty. Certainty resists adaptation. The German army at Stalingrad was not defeated by ignorance, but by belief in its own understanding. This is one of the most dangerous positions any organization can occupy. When success becomes identity, learning stops. The seventh lesson is that knowledge scales faster than force. Zaitsev's personal kill count mattered, but it was not decisive. What mattered was transmission. By teaching others, he multiplied his impact beyond anything he could achieve alone. The six-rifle system outlived his presence on the battlefield. Even after he was wounded, the effect continued. This is the mark of effective leadership. Leaders who must be present for success create fragile systems. Leaders who build methods create resilience. This distinction explains why some movements collapse when founders disappear while others endure for generations. Systems that rely on personality fade. Systems that rely on principles persist. Zaitsev's influence did not come from legend, but from structure. Eighth lesson is that myths obscure real lessons. After the war, propaganda transformed Zaitsev into a heroic symbol, inventing dramatic duels and exaggerating events. These stories captured attention but distracted from the true innovation. Myths personalize success. They encourage the belief that extraordinary outcomes require extraordinary individuals. This belief is comforting, but false. The real lesson of Stalingrad's snipers is unsettling. It suggests that ordinary people, applying insight systematically, can produce disproportionate effects. Myths simplify history and make it emotionally satisfying. They also prevent learning. By focusing on heroes, societies avoid examining systems. The ninth lesson is that warfare remains fundamentally human, regardless of technology. Tanks, aircraft, and artillery dominate historical narratives, yet Stalingrad was decided by men moving through rubble, exhausted, afraid, and uncertain. The six-rifle system succeeded because it addressed human limitations directly: fatigue, fear, habit, overconfidence. Technology failed when it ignored these factors. Simple rifles succeeded when paired with insight into human behavior. The lesson remains relevant today. Advanced systems promise dominance, but adversaries adapt by targeting human weaknesses. Technology evolves faster than psychology. Those who understand psychology gain enduring advantages. The 10th lesson is humility. Zaitsev resisted glorification. He understood that his effectiveness came from circumstances as much as talent. His method was not invented for fame, but for survival. This humility allowed learning. Arrogance would have prevented it. The German failure at Stalingrad was not a failure of courage or intelligence, but a failure of humility in the face of a radically changed environment. Humility enables reassessment. It allows admitting that what once worked no longer does. In any field, this may be the hardest lesson of all. Together, these lessons explain why Stalingrad was more than a battle. It was a demonstration of how systems emerge under extreme pressure and how human behavior shapes outcomes more decisively than plans. The six-rifle tactic was not a miracle. It was a logical response by someone who understood that survival depends on seeing reality as it is, not as doctrine claims it should be. Humans searched for a sniper and failed because they framed the problem incorrectly. They looked for a man when they were facing a method. They sought to eliminate a threat rather than understand it. By the time they recognized the difference, the battle was already lost in ways that maps and casualty figures could not capture. The enduring lesson of this story is not about killing. It is about thinking. Observation over assumption, coordination over isolation, patience over impulse, systems over individuals. These principles apply wherever humans operate under pressure, whether in war, leadership, or life itself. Stalingrad did not fall because one side wanted it more. It fell because one side learned faster. The story of Robert S. Johnson and the P-47 Thunderbolt is, at its core, a lesson about how modern war exposes the gap between theory and reality. Before June 26, 1943, the Thunderbolt existed largely as a controversy. Engineers defended it, pilots doubted it, and critics dismissed it. On paper, the aircraft seemed to violate everything fighter doctrine claimed to value. It was too large, too heavy, too slow to climb, and too inelegant to win classic dogfights. Against sleek German fighters designed around speed and maneuverability, the P-47 appeared out of place, almost primitive. Yet the events of that day over France revealed that the assumptions guiding those criticisms were incomplete. War did not reward theoretical perfection. It rewarded endurance. First lesson embedded in Johnson's survival is that combat is not a controlled environment. Pre-war doctrine imagined clean engagements where skill, speed, and tactical brilliance decided outcomes. In reality, combat is chaotic, violent, and unpredictable. Pilots are surprised, systems fail, enemy fire hits where it should not. In such conditions, machines designed for ideal performance are fragile. They work beautifully until the moment something goes wrong. The Thunderbolt was designed with the opposite assumption: something would go wrong. It was not built to avoid damage at all costs. It was built to continue functioning after damage occurred. Johnson's experience demonstrates this mercilessly. The first cannon shell did not merely damage his aircraft, it destroyed it as a fighting machine. Hydraulics failed, the cockpit burned, controls went dead. No amount of pilot skill could reverse that. From a doctrinal perspective, he should have died within seconds. The only reason he did not is that the aircraft around him had been designed to tolerate catastrophic failure without immediate collapse. The lesson here is stark. Survivability is not about preventing damage, but about managing its consequences. It leads to a broader principle about engineering under extreme conditions. Redundancy, margin, and strength are often criticized as inefficient. They add weight, cost, and complexity. In peacetime or in controlled testing, these criticisms seem valid. But in combat, redundancy is not waste, it is time. Armor plate is time. Self-sealing fuel tanks are time. Independent engine cylinders are time. Every additional second a damaged aircraft remains airborne is another chance for survival. The Thunderbolt converted weight into time, and time into life. The lesson lies in the difference between tactical success and strategic success. The P-47 was not always the best dogfighter in a one-on-one engagement, but wars are not won by isolated duels. They are won by sustained operations over months and years. An aircraft that preserves its pilots allows experience to accumulate. Experienced pilots are more effective, more adaptable, and more survivable. Over time, this advantage compounds. The Thunderbolt's low loss rates meant that pilots survived to fly again, learn from mistakes, and refine tactics. This mattered more than any single performance metric. And survival also highlights the importance of human capital in industrial warfare. Aircraft can be replaced relatively quickly. Trained, experienced pilots cannot. A fighter that sacrifices pilot survivability for marginal gains in performance is strategically flawed in prolonged conflict. The Thunderbolt's design implicitly recognized this. It was not optimized for winning every engagement. It was optimized for bringing pilots home. That choice paid dividends across hundreds of thousands of sorties. There's also a psychological dimension to this lesson. German pilots encountered Thunderbolts that refused to fall despite overwhelming damage. This eroded confidence in weapons and tactics. Combat effectiveness depends not only on firepower, but on belief that effort produces results. When pilots expend ammunition and see no effect, hesitation creeps in. Tactical certainty dissolves. The Thunderbolt did not just survive physically, it disrupted enemy expectations. Another critical lesson concerns the limits of expertise. Engineers, tacticians, and analysts were wrong about the Thunderbolt's value. Their models prioritized performance metrics that mattered in theory, but less in practice. Real combat revealed variables those models could not fully account for: stress, damage tolerance, pilot fatigue, and the sheer randomness of violence. This serves as a warning against overconfidence in abstract analysis. Systems must be tested in the conditions they are meant to endure, not merely optimized for ideal scenarios. The story also reframes heroism. Johnson's courage mattered, but it did not save him. What saved him was a system designed to protect its operator. Modern war reduces the role of individual heroics while increasing the importance of institutional decisions made long before combat. Design choices made in factories and offices determine who lives and who dies. The Thunderbolt's engineers, perhaps unknowingly, made decisions that saved thousands of lives. Moral lesson embedded in this. Designing for survivability reflects a value system that places human life above abstract ideals of efficiency or elegance. The Thunderbolt acknowledged that pilots would be exposed to extreme danger and sought to mitigate that danger where possible. This does not make war humane, but it recognizes the humanity of those forced to fight it. An air force that values pilot survival is one that can sustain itself ethically as well as strategically. Contrast between American and German industrial philosophies reinforces this lesson. American design emphasized robustness, redundancy, and mass production. German design emphasized precision, optimization, and performance. Both produced formidable machines, but only one approach scaled effectively under attrition. The Thunderbolt was not merely an aircraft. It was an expression of an industrial culture that understood war as a problem of endurance rather than brilliance. Another lesson lies in adaptability. The Thunderbolt's role